I don't know, will I need the mic? Thank you also for all coming out this early. I apologize for being a few minutes late. Scraping the car took a little longer than, and parking took longer than I had hoped. Also, I know that we're double booked. President Hinton is speaking at this time too. I would have liked to have seen her talk as well. I think my presentation today, with a little bit of discussion and Q&A at the end, will take about 35 minutes, 35 minutes, and then we can be on our way and get back to work. Nice to see some familiar faces. I'll hop right in. So here's my title, Imagination, Politics, and Aesthetics, From German Idealism to Angela Davis. Does anyone know who Angela Davis is? Have you read anything from Angela Davis, seen her speak? Okay, one of our premier public intellectuals, I would say, from the 60s until today. Let me give an overview, and then we'll show something of a roadmap where the talk is going to go today, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the philosophical aesthetics and what that means for us today. Okay. On November 6, 2018, American civil rights activist and scholar Angela Davis delivered a powerful address titled Politics and Aesthetics at New York University. In the talk, Dr. Davis states, and I paraphrase, "Art and the aesthetic realm are absolutely essential if we wish to change our current political situation, because art cultivates the imagination." Central point for her, art cultivates the imagination. Davis's statement that forward-thinking politics is possible only through imagination highlights the crucial role of the arts in the civil rights movements. The faculty of imagination can, according to Kant, whom she names in the talk, produce an original representation of an object preceding experience. Original representation of an object preceding experience. My presentation aims to explicate Davis's complex engagement with German idealist philosophy with a focus on Immanuel Kant's work on imagination and Friedrich Schiller's concept of aesthetic education. Davis's background includes a dissertation on Kant and the French Revolution, as well as graduate work in Frankfurt, Germany, and work with the German philosophers Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse. What is at stake today is that the faculty of the imagination allows Dr. King to have a dream of a better future in the first place. Davis is, firstly, our contemporary advocate for the artist's role as educator in cultivating the imagination for everyone, and secondly, she points out that by virtue of their mastery of the imagination, artists are often politically active because they can imagine not only new forms of art, but also new forms of political and societal organizations. So here's our roadmap for today. Give a quick overview of the thinkers that we'll be talking about: Immanuel Kant, Schiller, Angela Davis, and Spivak. I can also share these slides with you. I can share the link to Angela Davis's talk too, if you just want to give me your email at the end. Secondly, I'll go into depth about Dr. Angela Davis' background, previous civil rights work, and work today on aesthetics and politics, kind of her late stage. 3, we'll look at Davis's twin thesis that A, the artist cultivates the imagination for everyone, and how artists are often politically active because they imagine not only new forms of art, but also new political and societal structures. C, as well as how these points relate to the history of philosophical aesthetics, especially Kant's theory of the imagination and Friedrich Schiller's concept of aesthetic education. Finally, we'll move to how Davis's theses relate specifically to MLK Day and what we're celebrating this week. Finally, we'll end with a bit of Q&A and discussion. Okay. So who are some of these figures? Here they are in chronological order. Immanuel Kant, German philosopher, born 1724, died 1804. Friedrich Schiller, 1759 to 1805, German poet, philosopher, historian, and playwright. Some of you in my upper level class will have read a little Schiller for homework. Angela Yvonne Davis, 1944 to present, American academic and political activist. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, 1942 to the present, Indian scholar, literary theorist, and feminist critic. We won't have as much Spivak in this talk as I'd originally hoped, but I wanted to pair two long-gone thinkers with two people working today who draw on this German tradition. Okay. Has anyone read these thinkers? Wendy? Yeah? Which one? All of them. Will? Which text? Can I? Oh, democratic peace theory, maybe? Uh-huh, okay. Perpetual peace? Yeah. Topical for these campuses. Okay, so we're going to move now into specifically Dr. Davis's work. Here's are some of the classic books, some of the biggest books that she's produced, starting with Women, Race, and Class, Women, Truth, Politics in the 80s. And you can see with Blues Legacies, this is kind of her aesthetic turn. I would call it towards looking more at the arts. So who is Angela Davis? Even if we know, let's get a quick reminder. This is from Karen E. Newman's article on Angela Davis in the Encyclopedia of Alabama. Angela Davis is best known as an educator and civil rights activist who gained notoriety in the turbulence of the late 1960s and their protest movements. She was born in Birmingham on January 26, 1944, as the oldest of 4 children of service station owner B. Frank Davis and schoolteacher Sally E. Davis. When Davis was 4, her family moved out of the all-black projects into a white neighborhood. The following spring, white supremacists opposed to integration bombed the home of their neighbors, the Reverend and Mrs. Daberts. Bombing soon became such a constant in this section of Birmingham that it gained the nickname Dynamite Hill. Davis attended Carrie A. Tuggle School in Birmingham, which had the battered textbooks and dilapidated buildings typical of many black-only schools in the days of Jim Crow. Eager to leave Birmingham, Davis won a scholarship in 1959 to study at the Elizabeth Irwin High School in New York City. She subsequently attended Brandeis University on scholarship to study French literature and spent her junior year at the University of Paris. While in Paris, Davis learned of the bombings of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, in which 4 girls, friends of the Davis family, were killed. The murders left Davis grief-stricken and angry. She graduated magna cum laude in French literature in 1965 and pursued graduate work in philosophy at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany, under the famed theorist Theodor Adorno. So here is her direct contact with what is called the German Frankfurt School. Davis returned to the United States in 1967 to study for her doctorate in philosophy under the famed German scholar Herbert Marcuse at the University of California at San Diego, and to take part in the civil rights movement. Davis had become interested in mass movements opposing racism, classism, and colonialism while in Europe. In her dissertation, she discussed 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant's analysis of violence in the French Revolution. More of an academic than a demonstrator, Davis did, however, become a member of the Che Lumumba Club of the Communist Party in the U.S., and in 1968 made friends among the Black Panthers at the same time when both organizations were calling for radical change in the United States and were feared by mainstream America. So the 1960s, Angela Davis is there talking to all of these groups, both in Europe and in California. So we also see here, too, Angela Davis studied abroad and majored in languages and cultures, too. So we can add her to the list of languages. I don't know if Anna knows that she was French major. I'll have to tell her later. All right. So these are some of the books. There are many more. One could say a lot more about her background. What is she up to today? This is her management page, so if we were going to book Angela Davis, although she's booked through 2019, so we can't, to come talk to us, these are some of the topics: education or incarceration, abolitionist movements in the 21st century. Second from the bottom is the one that I'll be most interested in today, the role of art in society. So let's get a few of her quotes going on aesthetics and politics. First 3 are from the talk that she just gave in November, and the last one is a paraphrase from a talk she gave in Stockholm, and there's no recording of that one, but it's a very interesting quote nonetheless. So let's take a look. Art helps to cultivate the imagination. It encourages the imagination to face the unknown, to try to make something new out of the elements of the old. It takes courage to envision a different future. People inevitably feel more comfortable with what they know, even when what they know produces pain for themselves and others. Art is so powerful because it reminds us that we all have the potential to imagine something very new. The experience of the art, whether it's a painting, a photograph, a film, a song, reminds us that we are all connected to other human beings who also yearn for the new, for the as yet historically unrealized. And this is why aesthetics is so central to philosophy. As so many thinkers from Immanuel Kant to Gayatri Spivak have noted, this is why aesthetics is central to critical theory, because it reminds us that we are not obligated to accept the given simply because it is given. And finally, paraphrased from Carl Linden, who attended her speech in Stockholm in 2015, Davis emphasized that it is not by chance that Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, is a performance artist who is conscious of the importance of challenging universal tyranny. So, two theses that I want to read out of Davis's work on aesthetics are the following. Twin thesis that the artist, A, cultivates the imagination for everyone. I'll repeat these throughout. It's what we'll want to talk about a little bit at the end. How artists are often politically active because they imagine not only new forms of art, but new forms of politics and societal organization, as well as how these points relate to philosophical aesthetics, especially Immanuel Kant's theory of imagination and Schiller's aesthetic education. Okay, three big words there. Aesthetics, imagination, and aesthetic education. So let's just start with aesthetics. If you look at the American Heritage Dictionary, this is the definition of aesthetics. 1, the branch of philosophy that deals with the nature, expression, and perception of beauty, as in the fine arts, the study of psychological responses to beauty and artistic experiences. 2, the conception of what is artistically valid or beautiful. Minimalist aesthetics, as an example, an artistically beautiful or pleasing appearance. They're looking for quality construction, not aesthetics. So in the way things look, do you use the word at all? In what sense do you use it? I think it's become something of a synonym for style nowadays. Do you hear the word, use it? Yeah, once in a while? That's aesthetically pleasing. Okay. Pleasing to the eye. Mm-hmm. Sometimes plastic surgery is referred to as aesthetic surgery. The word actually comes from a predecessor of Kant's and someone he learned a lot from, a philosopher named Baumgarten. And Baumgarten is the first to use the term, taking it from the Greek aesthesis, which actually just comes from perception. So originally it was a bigger field within philosophy, the science of perception. And that Greek usage of it is still stuck in our English today when we think of anesthesia, when you go to the doctor, that which stops one from perceiving. So aesthetics is generally the big term for what one senses. So that information that comes to you through your senses and not through your logical thinking. And then when you get to Kant, he is the one that brings about this kind of standard dictionary definition of the approach of philosophy that deals with the fine arts and beauty. So Kant, as a reader of Baumgarten, wrote his third critique on the faculty of judgment and this more specific American Heritage Dictionary definition. In that text, Kant focuses on the beautiful, the agreeable, the sublime. These are called aesthetic categories. But however, it's in the Anthropology, which comes out later, where he discusses the imagination directly, and that's where Davis gets the term. So here's a nice definition of and summary of the imagination given by Howard Cagill in the Kant Dictionary from 1798. Kant divides sensibility into sense, Sinn, there's your first German word for today, and imagination, the former comprising the faculty of intuition in the presence of an object, and latter intuition without the presence of an object. The non-presence of the object for imagination can be thought of in two ways, and this is a crucial point that Kant makes. Either the object was present but is no longer, or its presence lies in the future. Considered from the standpoint of empirical imagination, this gives rise to the faculties of memory and prevision, which recollect and predict the presence of discrete objects. However, Kant also introduces another distinction within the concept of imagination that allows him to distinguish between A, empirical or recollective imagination, and B, productive, or here's our watchword, poetic imagination. This distinction between imagination as a faculty of the derived representation, which recalls to mind a previous empirical perception, It is the work of the productive imagination which most interests Kant and which he puts most to use, and this is the one that interests Angela Davis as well. So when we're learning about philosophy, we want to grab these little distinctions in the language and in the histories of a concept. So this makes sense, right? There's two types of imagination. When you don't have the object present. You can imagine right now, I don't know, your teddy bear or something like that from childhood. You don't have it with you. I don't always take mine with me. You can imagine something from the past and recollect it, or you can use this faculty to look forward to the future to find something new. This second version, the productive or poetic imagination, is the one which Davis shows the most interest in. So the quote that I paraphrased at the beginning, here I give it again. Art and the aesthetic realm are absolutely essential if we wish to change a current political situation because art cultivates the imagination, has to do with this. Looking forward, imagining new ways of arranging things. So we've had aesthetics, we've had imagination. Let's take a look at Schiller's aesthetic education. So Angela Davis also, at a time when the news cycle talks a lot about the politics, right? The news is always starting with the government shutdown today. Angela Davis says, hold on. What is very important for us right now is aesthetics. I know, it might sound odd, but what is important is aesthetics. And this is actually a reenactment. It's reworking, in a way, what Schiller did right after the French Revolution. So here's his quote. This is a famous quote of Schiller's from right after the French Revolution. The eyes of the philosopher are fixed as expectedly as those of the worldling upon the political arena, where at present, so it is believed, the high destiny of mankind is being decided. I hope to convince you that the subject of beauty is far less alien to the need of the age than to its taste, that we must indeed, if we are to solve the political problem in practice, follow the path of aesthetics, since it is through beauty that we arrive at freedom. The stakes can't be any higher. The newspapers are writing about what's happening in France at the time every day. People are going there to see what's happening. In a way, the news cycle is similarly focused on politics today, and Angela Davis does this Schiller move of saying, wait, let's also think of aesthetics. I also have the German up there. If you don't speak German, you probably do speak a lot of German, actually, by the way. Don't be too afraid of it. We have it up there for majors and minors and speakers in the room, too. Okay. So Davis is working in a way that Schiller does as well. What does Schiller mean by aesthetic education? So for him, he's responding as well to the terror of the French Revolution, when things get very violent, people start dying, and he indicates that there are two problems with the people. The people aren't ready for their politics. In a way, they aren't yet prepared for their politics. One, some are too lethargic. They don't participate in politics, and some are too overeager and too active or too rational in how they act in their politics. So some watchwords for Schiller. Now it's a big book, we don't have time to get into. They're all big books actually, but we don't have a ton of time to get into, but some watchwords for Schiller are harmony. So there's a Kantian distinction between the body and mind, not only a Kantian one, a long philosophical one. Schiller wants to harmonize that. That's a word he uses. And now some more German for you. I love these terms. He talks about schmelzende Schönheit, so melting beauty, which would be a nice lullaby or something that calms you down. Nice soft pastel colors. If you're too overly active, no, really, this is what he's after. Or if you're too lethargic, he talks about energische Schönheit, energetic Schönheit. And we had a bit of an example of that when I was playing Stevie Wonder this morning. It got us moving at this time in the morning. I saw a few little dance moves here and there. That's energische Schönheit, energetic beauty. So those are a few watchwords from him. So we can summarize this idealist tradition that Angela Davis knows, worked on, and is putting into action today. I think we can summarize it in kind of two ways. These are two ways she's thinking about aesthetics and politics today. An updated form of aesthetic education Schiller, where the artist's creations remind the viewer of their own faculty of imagination, specifically the productive or poetic imagination, and their ability to envision a future in a different society or politics. This is a blending of Kant's imagination concept with Schiller's aesthetic education concept. This is not exactly what Schiller would say, that seeing a work of art reminds you of imagination and, in a way, reminds you that you can think of things differently. So the example would be, you can't have a dream of the future without the faculty of the imagination that looks forward. So Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream is activating this productive or poetic imagination. Secondly, something she points out is that artists themselves are often also politically active because of their refined imagination allows them to see both these new forms of art and new ways of putting society together. There are a lot of other German idealist philosophers and romantic thinkers that I could bring up here. We'll leave them to the side. I think there's more going on. But these, I would say, are the two big points that Davis is drawing on today. Now, what does that mean specifically for us this week and celebrating MLK Day? One thing I'd like to point out is we listened to Stevie Wonder for a reason. In 1980, Stevie Wonder wrote a song called Happy Birthday. And Happy Birthday was directed at Martin Luther King and was part of the King Center's push to get Martin Luther King Day recognized as a holiday. So I'm going to read briefly here from William Jones's article in The Nation about the King Center's push from Martin Luther King's death through the 80s to establish Martin Luther King Day as a holiday. Quote, after a decade of worker organizing for the holiday, the campaign for the MLK Day took a sharp turn. With union allies weakened, the King Center launched an ambitious campaign to generate corporate and popular support for King Day. It paid off in 1980 when superstar Stevie Wonder dedicated his hit song Happy Birthday to King. By 1982, the King Center received large donations from Coca-Cola, the Miller Brewing Company, and other megacorporations. The center also gained admission to the combined federal campaign, allowing it to solicit donations from federal employees and members of the military. Coretta Scott King presented Congress with 6 million signatures in favor of a King Day bill, the largest petition in favor of an issue in U.S. history. The largest petition in favor of an issue in U.S. history. Congress passed the bill, and on November 3, 1983, President Reagan signed it into law. So Davis's thesis is directly applicable to the founding of Martin Luther King Day. A poet-artist helped to bring about the largest petition in the favor of an issue in U.S. history. And without Stevie Wonder, whose music we were enjoying before the talk, we might not be celebrating today. So the last part, let's listen to Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday. All right, we'll open the floor for a few minutes. Questions, comments, interventions, critiques of my talk, of Angela Davis's position. Kant would stand at the beginning of what we understand as critique today, thinking about criticism and what that means. So, anything you'd like? What would you like to say?
All right. We're talking about how there's kind of there's two sides to the artistic activism. There's both what the artist creates and also just the artists themselves, if they're famous artists, having a platform to create change. And Stevie Wonder could have certainly just given a talk about how Martin Luther King should have a holiday, and that would have been interesting, and he would have had a large audience if he would have started a concert by saying that or something. But instead, he created something that took his imagination to create, and then also his imagination to think of such a thing. and then give that to his audience. And that would have been more striking than if he would have just spoken.
Oh, okay. So there's something kind of and the art that he's producing is something like an excess above the message.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah. And that's something he can really contribute. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Very interesting. What do the others talk about?
We talked a bit about the role.
Talk loud. I can't hear you.
We talked about, it was Cultivate this point, so we're not like taking it. But we talked about how truth is in art. And so a society is able to acknowledge its faults and its violence, its racism, its injustices through the arts. So that also, yeah, I can see the ugliness of its society currently, and that somehow this acknowledgement brings action to society, so to say, this is not who we want to be, and so to go towards action, but that's only possible through confronting who we are today through art.
Very interesting. I point to one word there, truth. Does art aim at truth? Or can we stick with the term's etymology in artificiality and artifice?
Artificiality.
It's the same root. It's interesting that you say that. Before Schiller and before Kant, you probably couldn't say, well, art aims at truth. From Plato through Rousseau, Aristotle, few people will break a lance for art as positive. But in a way, it's this era that opens up a positive way of thinking of art, of affirming art as something positive. That through beauty, one gets at freedom. Through the sublime, one is reminded of one's rational capabilities and therefore one's ethical capabilities. For Plato, he says, there's the ideals, that's the truth. Then there's us, shadows here. We aren't the ideal forms. And then when we make art, we're another step away from truth. So we are 3 steps away from truth when we look at art.
Because I took aesthetics of violence and nonviolence, so it's kind of where I got the word truth from.
Okay.
So it's more from Heidegger's definition, so that through art there's an unveiling of what was previously veiled. So seeing something not previously seen. And so this is my definition of truth, well, Heidegger's definition, but
As
for these purposes.
Okay. I just wanted to one last comment and then
we just kind of talked about how important art is to not just like artists and everything, but like everyone, because it is necessary to see the future, and also mentioned like therapeutics, like how art can be therapeutic to people. So.
okay. Well, happy birthday. That's Martin Luther King Day. If you have any other questions or comments, you want any more information, just email me. You can find me on Thank you for coming out this cold morning, and we'll leave with a little more energische
Are we going to have question and answers?
Well, if anyone has a question, I said questions, comments, critique.
Do you have a question?
I have a question.
Okay, sure, go for it.
So, you talked about Adorno and how Angela Davis read Adorno, and
Right.
this is sort of along the lines of the Heidegger question. Adorno was completely convinced that aesthetics can be used negatively, especially in terms of this sensing as opposed to thinking phenomenon. And so he had a big fight with a guy named Walter Benjamin about whether art could be used, aesthetics should be used politically or not. And he came to the conclusion that it isn't. And I wonder if Angela Davis addresses, since Adorno essentially says no, because the Nazis did exactly that. Exactly what you just showed, to send culture off into a completely different, not positive, not good direction. So I wonder how she deals with that.
Right. The quick answer is, I am surprised I haven't found more Adorno when I've looked at what Angela Davis is working on today. In the Blues Legacies book, there's not much mention of Adorno as well. She really is citing today Baumgarten, Kant, these idealist philosophers, which is the focus today. I'm surprised that there's less Adorno there. To my understanding, however, late Adorno in the aesthetic theory does this very complicated move in which art, so coming off of Benjamin with the politicized art, which we could call, Stevie wondered, it's directly talking about Martin Luther King Day. But Adorno takes this entire aesthetic tradition, as well as the Marxist tradition, a step farther in the aesthetic theory, in which art itself should be, to bring about change, art needs to be somehow socially oriented, yet present itself as if it weren't. So it's a very complicated move. I'm not sure I've understood exactly what he means in that vein. I'm not an Adorno expert. But there seems to be a play there of not having directly propagandistic art. It's kind of like having your Kant and your Marx too, is what he's after. But the short answer is, I'm surprised I haven't seen more Adorno.
Just curious how she
Yeah,
deals
it's
with
surprising.
this.
Yeah. And it might be I haven't dug enough, and I'll find in the next interview.
We need to bring her to campus so we can ask her.
I know, she's booked. You have to make do with me. Any other questions? All right. We'll leave
Thank
it.
you.